yeah, I'll hand it over to John Newton to give you a bit of history about Monsanto and the kind of practices that they've been involved in, all in the name of profit, all in the name of increasing their market and their corporate control, very, very blindly and with lack of any kind of moral direction. Okay, cool. Here's John Newton. And John Newton is a food writer, critique, and has written, here's the book, March Against Monsanto.
I haven't written it,
He hasn't written
a review of it.
He wrote a review of it, and he's written in lots of articles in newspapers, magazines, yada yada, yeah, exactly. Okay, here's to. We need about 10 marshals to help surround, sort of walk alongside and on the perimeter of the marching people to just offer sort of protection, I guess, from if people just slip into the road or whatever. Okay, so here's to John.
Thank you. Is that loud? Can you hear me? What's that?
A bit closer to your mouth.
You want us to move down there?
Just hold it close to your mouth.
Hold it close to your mouth.
If people are in the back, move around this area. Unfortunately, in the sun, people may be able to hear more clearly. Squeeze in. You get close. We're all family here.
Okay, I'm here today not as a writer, but I'm here today as a member of the Greens, which is indeed the only party that has a fairly well articulated or very well articulated policy against genetically modified organisms. Okay, now here's my little prepared bit. What I want to ask is, if there are no problems with GM crops, could somebody please answer the following questions? If anybody in the audience can answer these questions, I'd love to hear from them. Why? My wife saying speak up. Why, if it's such a good thing, has Monsanto dealt in deception, misinformation and brazen lying over the years? If it is such a good thing for the world, why the bloody hell lie about it? Why is every single scientific report that finds a possible problem with Monsanto crops attacked? I've had this recently. I've done a lot of discussion on the site of conversation. Every time I say something anti-Monsanto, they dive on you. It doesn't matter what it is. As far as Monsanto is concerned, if it's anti-Monsanto, it has to be buried. And it means burying the messenger as well. Anybody familiar with the history of Monsanto will know the names Arpad Pusztai and Ignacio Chapela, two scientists who lost their positions for publishing critical findings against Monsanto. Dr. Martin Stapper is a well-known Australian scientist who lost his job with CSIRO because he spoke out against Monsanto. And why is it difficult, if not impossible, for independent researchers to obtain Monsanto's seed for testing? Dr. Judy Carman wants to do some independent testing. She can't get the seed, they won't give it to her. Now, I suspect the answer to all these questions is the paranoid culture of a company that has dealt in dangerous chemicals and technologies for almost 80 years. GM technology is not the first. The list of products that Monsanto has been associated with, marketed or has released on the world is scary, beginning in 1935 when it bought the company that had launched the production of polychlorinated biphenyl, PCB, which became known as one of the most dangerous compounds ever created. Closely related to PCB are dioxins, a group of poisons which were the primary toxic components of Agent Orange, the devastating defoliant used most famously during the Vietnam War. There we are. And two deadly herbicides, which also contain dioxins, are 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, which you've probably heard of. Monsanto products, both of them. 2,4-D, by the way, was only banned in Australia in August this year. And Roundup, the wonderful Roundup, the Monsanto brand name for a compound including glyphosate, and now, and more importantly, the herbicide which can be used by the tank load by farmers the world over who contract to buy Monsanto's Roundup-ready genetically engineered seeds. Roundup, Monsanto tells us, is environmentally benign and totally safe. It's proving to be anything but. I'd just like to tell a story from back in 1985, which just gives you an idea of the devious nature of these bastards. It concerns the report of the Royal Commission on the use and effects of chemical agents. Could you take that first page? On Australian personnel in Vietnam. You might remember Agent Orange. And the report on this use of this stuff found that no veteran had suffered due to exposure to chemicals 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, Agent Orange, Monsanto products in Vietnam. Now there was a bloke who gave evidence to this commission who was a bit bewildered by this finding. He was a Swedish researcher who specialised in the effects of dioxin and who had given evidence. He discovered that the views taken by the commission were supported and shaped by a distinguished British epidemiologist and cancer specialist, a guy called Professor Sir Richard Dole. A year after Richard Dole's death in 2005... Is that better? Is that better?
Oh yeah!
I'll start again. No, a year after Sir Richard Dole's death in 2005, The Guardian revealed that Dole had secretly worked for Monsanto for 30 years. That's just one story.
Boo! Here.
So what's happening here? Well, here's a statement by Ignacio Chapela, a Mexican biologist and one of the authors of a paper on the genetic Mexican corn crop published in Nature, which is a peer-reviewed publication, who subsequently lost his position at Berkeley University and had his paper retracted, which had never happened before, after a number of complaints by biotech stooges. Chapela said, there was a time when science and the university loudly proclaimed their independence from governmental, military and industrial institutions. That's over. Not only because scientists depend upon industry to survive, but because they themselves are part of industry. Unfortunately, as long as organisations like the CSIRO have to solicit funding from companies like Monsanto, there will be no independent science. And if you want to know more about this wonderful company, I urge you to get this book, The World According to Monsanto, by Marie Monique Robin. The World According to Monsanto. Now, it's available as a book, but also it's online. If you look up The World According to Monsanto, the film, the documentary, is online and it's free. And this will teach you as much as you need to know about Monsanto. Thank you very much.
Is everyone ready to march? Woo! Okay.
Stop Monsanto! Stop Monsanto! Stop Monsanto! Stop Monsanto!
Say no to GMO! Say no to GMO! Say no to GMO! Say no to GMO! Say no Monsanto! Say no Monsanto! Say no Monsanto!
Let's go around!
To plant in the minds of the people through such organisations as Sunrise and the various banking systems that we are subservient to them, and that we require them to keep this society running, when in fact that's not the case. They rely on us. They rely on our labour. They rely on our creativity. They rely on us to keep this society running. So why are we here again, everyone? Just a reminder in case we've forgotten. No Monsanto! 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 That seems to be the easiest catch cry to remember and to get into rhythm. I like it. No GMOs as well. Okay, so we're going to have some speakers now. We're going to have Patricia Ronald from AFPINET.
They want to have longer patents on medicines, that means longer monopoly rights to charge high prices, and they want to delay the appearance of cheaper generic medicines onto the market. Now that will mean we all pay more for medicines, and we've got to say no to that. They also want media companies want more copyright on the internet. That means more control over what you can do on the internet, and more copyright fees have to be paid to the big media companies who own those rights. It's less freedom on the internet, so we should be saying no to that. And the big one that they all want is they all want the right of foreign investors to be able to sue governments for damages if a law or policy harms their agreement. And we're talking here about suing governments for hundreds of millions of dollars. The example we have at the moment is that the Australian government last year passed plain packaging legislation for tobacco to regulate the amount of advertising that could be on tobacco packs. The Philip Morris company, tobacco company, is trying to sue the Australian government for hundreds of millions of dollars over this legislation because it says that it harms their investment. And this is despite the fact that a group of tobacco companies, including Philip Morris, tried to challenge the legislation in our High Court and they lost. Our High Court said, you're not entitled to compensation, it's a public health measure, but they have gone off using an obscure Australia-Hong Kong investment agreement which has this provision for investors to sue governments. They've gone off to an international tribunal which favours investors because they think they can overcome the decision of our High Court and our Parliament. This is an attack on our democracy and our sovereignty. So, what's all this got to do with Monsanto? Well, Monsanto is right in the middle of this. It's a leading player in the biotech and agribusiness industries, and they made a public submission to the negotiations. And this is what they want the negotiations to come up with. First of all, they want longer and stronger patent rights over seeds and plants. They want to be able to patent living organisms. Now, this is bad enough in Australia, but in developing countries, it means that poor farmers have to suddenly start paying for seeds that they've developed themselves over hundreds of years. So this is the extension of patentability over seeds, plants and living organisms is something that they're asking for in this agreement. We don't know if it's been agreed yet, but we should say to our governments no to this. Secondly, they want restrictions on the right of governments to label food, including GMO labelling. So they want, even in Australia, although our GMO labelling laws are pretty minimal, they see those as a barrier to trade. In the US, they don't have any labelling of GM food, and they also want to restrict the right of governments to regulate the growing of GE crops or GMO crops. So again, that's an interference in our right to regulate at the domestic level and to regulate the use of GMOs. And thirdly, they very strongly support this right of foreign investors to sue governments for damages. An example of that, it's not Monsanto, but Dow Chemical in Canada, under the North American Free Trade Agreement, is using this right to sue a local government in Quebec because it banned certain types of pesticides for use in gardens and parks. So again, you can see that that is the kind of thing that these agribusiness and biotech companies are trying to do through these trade agreements. They're trying to change our laws in ways that suit them but reduce our rights. So we've been campaigning against this agreement for the last 3 years since the negotiations began. We want our government to say no to all of this, and particularly on the right of investors to sue, it's worth knowing that the previous government had said no to this, but the current coalition government is now saying they're willing to negotiate on that issue. So we've got to say really strongly to them that this is not acceptable. We shouldn't allow giant corporations like Monsanto to have the right to sue our government over health and environmental laws. Just a couple of things that are coming up in the campaign. We have a website, aftinet, aftinet.org. There's a whole lot of materials and fact sheets there. There's also an email message you can send to the Minister saying why you oppose all these things. You can also attend our seminar on October the 22nd in State Parliament House. We're having an educational seminar about the TPP, so everyone's welcome to come to that. It's at 12 o'clock in New South Wales Parliament House. We're also planning to have a rally in November in the lead up to the December meeting, which is going to be held at the same time as the World Trade Organisation in Bali, when there's going to be some decision making about this agreement. So we will circulate to all your
the information about the rally to all your networks. It'll be late November, probably around the 23rd. Finally, what we're demanding from the government is that they release the text, make it public, so we can see what it is they're negotiating. These things should not be secretly signed away in trade agreements. They should be up for public debate. We should not allow our government to make deals in secret which give more power to companies like Monsanto.
Now we're going to have Claire Parfitt talking about agricultural GM stuff. You get the idea. Okay, here's Claire.
Hi everybody, thanks. A couple of years ago, a farmer in Western Australia told me that he and his neighbours feel that they're contractors for Monsanto now. I was working for Greenpeace at the time and was in WA visiting farmers and supporting people in their defence against the increasing contamination of their land by GM crops. And the reason there was so much attention in WA at the time was because of the contamination of an organic wheat farm near Kojonup, in a couple of hours drive from Perth. So this comment by a retiring farmer that we're all contractors for Monsanto now inspired me to investigate the idea further. For this farmer, there was a sense of autonomy being lost and of becoming increasingly subordinated to the demands of big seed companies like Monsanto. And I wondered to what extent this is a shared experience in other parts of the world and other parts of Australia. So I wrote a 35,000-word thesis about it that I've abbreviated here for you guys today. So what I learned was that intellectual property laws, and in particular patent laws, have expanded significantly in the last few decades. As these protections become stronger, farmers are required to pay hefty fees and sign onerous contracts to access seeds. GM crops are subject to a higher level of patent protection than crops bred by other means. They're associated with the creation of what is sometimes called patent thickets, where a number of patents cover a single plant. So for example, the GM Golden Rice project required access to around 70 patents. So one of the consequences of this expansion of intellectual property rights is the increasing consolidation and concentration of capital. Multinational corporations exert extraordinary influence over the food system, and the seed industry is no exception. 5 companies control the majority of trade in the seed market globally, and Monsanto is the leading player with around 20% of the market. They have a particularly strong hold on GM crops. A couple of years ago, it was estimated that they have around that they hold patents on around 90% of the world's GM crops. This monopolistic control on the market enables seed companies to engage in anti-competitive behaviour. So for example, farmers have complained of Monsanto colluding with its key competitors, companies like DuPont, to control trade in seeds and to fix prices. There's evidence that in places where GM crops have been commercialised, seed prices have accelerated much more quickly than they have in other places. In addition, the relationship between seeds and other agricultural inputs enables horizontal as well as vertical integration of the supply chain and reinforces this monopolistic control over the market. So in the 1980s, major agrochemical companies like Monsanto began to acquire seed companies. In fact, Monsanto wasn't a seed company before the 1980s. As a result of this wave of acquisitions in the 1980s, 4 of the world's top 10 seed companies are also amongst the top 10 agrochemical companies. And this joint control of seeds and agrochemicals fixed into the way that GM crops operate. So despite a couple of decades of promises that GM crops can grow with less water, can produce more nutrients, and other fairy tales, none of that has come to pass. In fact, the majority of GM crops are simply resistant to a herbicide. So in the case of Monsanto's crops, they're resistant to Monsanto's herbicide Roundup, and in the case of DuPont's crops, they're resistant to DuPont's herbicide Liberty Link. So the crops and the chemicals are sold together in order to reinforce the company's market control. So this means that farmers are not only required to buy the seeds, but they're also required to buy the herbicides, both as a practical obligation and also as a contractual obligation. It's something they agree to when they buy the seeds. So this brings us to the question of contracts. Farmers who purchase and use GM seeds are required to sign what Monsanto calls a technology use agreement. In addition to the payment of huge fees to access the seeds, the agreements impose restrictions on farm management practices, like the requirement to use a particular kind of herbicide. They also prevent farmers from saving seeds or conducting research to develop new varieties. And they allow access to Monsanto's executives to farms in order to ensure that all the contractual obligations are being met. So the restrictions on seed saving and research in these contracts run contrary to the way that plant breeding has been conducted for generations. Farmers have promoted seed diversity and contributed to improved agronomic performance since plant breeding has begun since the beginnings of agriculture. As the public interest in plant breeding has grown over the last 100 years or so, farmers have worked together with universities and public organisations to develop, to participate in plant breeding. But over the last couple of decades, intellectual property laws restrict plant breeding activities and have meant that the future of the agricultural sector and the future of food is increasingly being determined by a handful of seed companies like Monsanto. So Monsanto and other major seed companies have captured public research funds and organisations. Here in Australia, the CSIRO is engaged in joint ventures with the world's 4 largest seed companies. Similarly, the University of Adelaide, which engages in much of Australia's plant breeding activity, works together with Intergrain, which was previously a public wheat breeding organisation but is now partly owned by Monsanto. And both the CSIRO and the University of Adelaide share board members and executives with the seed companies and agrochemical companies they work with. The direction of research and development in agri-food in the agri-food sector is crucial to meeting future food needs in the context of many economic, ecological and social pressures. As we're all aware, our food system is horribly broken. And the justification for intellectual property rights is often that they can assist in spurring innovation. But in fact, the contrary is true. The possibility of achieving the kinds of changes that are required to make our food system effective and sustainable is limited by existing intellectual property regimes. Current intellectual property laws provide an incentive to reinforce the industrial farming system and in order to benefit the major seed companies that control the food system as it stands. So one of the other arguments that is often made in favour of GM crops is that farmers have a choice, and that the introduction of GM crops increases farmer choice by increasing the varieties available. But actually there's increasing evidence that the introduction of GM crops does completely the opposite. Joint ventures and cross-licensing agreements between the major industry players, collaborating on research, development and also marketing, restrict access to new plant varieties. In the United States, companies like Monsanto and DuPont control so much of the seed market and the available seed banks that they restrict market offerings to GM only. Recent research published in June this year shows a similar dynamic in Europe, where countries that have commercialised GM have fewer varieties available than in countries where they haven't commercialised GM. Here in Australia, there's effectively no choice for cotton farmers. All cotton grown in Australia is GM. For canola, which is the other major crop that's been commercialised here in Australia with GM, there's still access to non-GM seed, but non-GM farmers are increasingly threatened by contamination. This issue of contamination highlights the fact that farmers are affected and face huge legal and financial risks related to GM, regardless of whether they choose to plant it themselves or not. In North America, Monsanto has sued hundreds, perhaps thousands of farmers for seed piracy. The data on this is very opaque, it's hard to know, but damages awards have been made to the company at estimated between 85 million and 160 million US dollars. For example, in Canada, Monsanto took action against Percy Schmeiser, a canola breeder whose land was contaminated by GM. Schmeiser argued that the GM plants were there as a result of contamination. He didn't plant them himself, and the Supreme Court in Canada found that it didn't matter how it got there, and the company's patent had been breached regardless of how the seed arrived there. So it becomes increasingly difficult for non-GM farmers, and especially organic farmers, to coexist with GM. In 2003, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization reported that canola farmers in Western Canada could no longer grow organic as a result of contamination. A number of organic farmers associations have brought actions claiming that their activities are being restricted by the spread of GM in North America, and they've all been unsuccessful so far. Since GM canola has been introduced in Australia, there have been increasing incidences of contamination of farmland, roadsides, grain silos, and other grain handling infrastructure. Around 30 incidences of such contamination were reported by 2011. A GM Freeze campaign has recently been launched. They're arguing for no new GM foods to be approved for consumption, no new GM crops to be approved for growing, and no new GM crop growing areas. There are some people here from that organisation, so you should seek them out, or Google them and try to support their campaign if that's if something you're upset about, which I think pretty much all of you probably are. The most damaging contamination case so far is the one that in Western Australia that I mentioned earlier. In that case, Steve Marsh discovered in late 2010 that 70% of his organic wheat and oats farm had been contaminated by GM canola. He lost his organic status and incurred significant financial losses. In Australia, there's currently no legislative protection for farmers who suffer losses as a result of contamination by GM. So Steve is taking legal action for damages in a case that's the first of its kind and will have huge implications for farmers here and elsewhere. The case will go to trial in February next year, and his lawyers are working for free, but there are still many other costs associated with the action, and there are some people here collecting donations for him. If you're able to support him in any way, that would be really great, as this case has implications for anyone who eats, which I guess is everybody.
Yeah.
Here's Ian Rose.
Hello everybody, thanks for coming today. I too would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, elders past and present. Look, my speech will be quick, but I've got a couple of important addresses for you to write down, so get your pens out and your smartphones. This is really important to write these addresses down, because you'll want to use them. The matter of utmost urgency today is that all of us try and stop these companies like Monsanto being able to sue our government if we try to stop GMOs, or because we label GMO products, which will happen if the Trans-Pacific Partnership goes through. The first address to note, are you ready for your addresses here? The first address to note is aftinet.org.au/CMS/node, that's NODE/627. Okay, that's got a letter that spells out many of the dangers of joining the TPP, and Patricia mentioned it earlier. Please cut and paste this letter and send it to as many parliamentarians and senators as you can. Okay, the second address for them is aph.gov.au/senators_members. You just click on the senators and members and up come all their addresses. So, even though our government is being hijacked by corporations, the government is supposed to be working for us. And if enough of us email them with this letter, we will get a response. As there are some in government who still believe in democracy and not corporatocracy. Also, the opposition needs something to call the government to task with, so if enough of us write, we have a better chance of stopping this. as most of them are pretending they either don't know about it, and if it happens, they'll pretend they weren't warned. If we write these addresses, send these letters to them, they can't say that. So I'll give you those addresses again in case anybody missed them. That's afti.org.au/cms/node/627, and the other one is aph.gov.au/senators_and/members. Okay, thank you, and send your letters.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, so basically, Sean, he's been involved in action himself. He's been engaged in action in Canterbury Council area to ban glyphosate, and he just wants to say a few words about this petition. Plug it and then hand it out.
Yay! Give yourselves a pat on the back. Okay, so I've been involved with other people in a move against glyphosates in Marrickville Council, and we took the initiative. Like our council, a guy called Isiwana, he banned glyphosates because the studies have shown that it causes miscarriage, it's a grade 1 carcinogen, blah 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 blah. And so they banned it. So we wanted to ban it we wanted to stop it from being sprayed in Marrickville, and we made a move. We got signatures. We had a lot of information, but the councillors, some of them wouldn't budge because they're still brainwashed by the land care groups who are brainwashed by Monsanto. We gave them the evidence. Denmark banned it because they showed it to contaminate the groundwater. Ontario, the same thing. And basically, it's a carcinogen, we shouldn't be using it. And so they looked at it and they again deferred to Monsanto. But then the good thing was we went to Canterbury and we just said, please don't spray our house. So this is something you can do practically, every one of you. Send a letter, you can send an email, a homing pigeon, whatever. Send it to your council and ask them to not spray the front of your house, because you might have a child or someone in your house you don't want to be contaminated with this garbage. So there are practical things. We're going to hand out this petition, and so if you can sign it, that's in public places as well. But there are things that can be done on a practical level apart from not supporting the company, not supporting the parties that support them. But ask your council, do not spray this in front of my house. Even better, do not spray it anywhere. And then you can look also, it's been used in agriculture, and it's basically been destroying soil, destroying microorganisms, mycelial networks. It's destroying life, which this company has been doing so well. And you guys all know how fucked they are anyway. It's not like anyone's here surprised for the first time to find out this is an evil company. So the big job for all of you is to go speak to someone that's never heard about Monsanto. And I'm surprised the amount of times I go, hey, policeman over there, have you heard of glyphosate, that cancerous chemical that's being sprayed on our planet and contaminating our groundwater? And they go, what's that? I'm watching Friday Night Footy. I don't know what you're talking about. So what you got to do is you got to speak to them and you got to tell them about what this poison is, and then you got to show them about 10 studies for their one peer-reviewed study that's been put out by Monsanto in order to make them go, hang on a second. And then they might not give a fuck. And then you got to still speak to someone else and tell them, hey, I spoke to that old lady around the corner, little Greek old lady. As soon as she understood poison, food, poison, kids, she was like, no, bad thing. So make it simple. They're poisoning our planet, our soil. Please, council, don't poison our soil. Don't poison my kid. Here's my signature. That's one of the small things. And you can see little things lead to big things. And even that Monsanto Protection Act has been repealed because of people here doing stuff. And you might have wanted to spend home on the couch like I did, or go, my friends went away and I wanted to go with them, but this shit's important. It's one of the most important things in life: food, air, water. Without those, Friday Night Footy doesn't matter, just in case anyone here thinks it does. So sign this stuff. Go speak to your neighbour. That's the thing, because we're all here, but you've got to go interact with someone outside that doesn't know. And that's the way we form these mycelial networks. So go and tell your neighbour, take one of these, sign it, and also send an email to your council saying, don't spray my house with crap, please. or else. Yay!
Yay! Woo! People! Awesome! Okay, so that's basically that's it really. I mean, now I guess it's just up to us to like take action. You know, you don't have to take like crazy revolutionary action, or you could if you want. I mean, it's up to you. But you know, day-to-day action towards you know, engaging people, talking to people, creating movement. You know, that's what it's about. All right.
March Against Corruption on the 2nd of November.
There's a March Against Corruption on the 2nd of November. 1 o'clock from Town Hall. If you're interested in more marching, which is an important part of the whole process of engagement, then come along. Otherwise, yeah, let's hang out, get to know each other. There's food, and you know, dance.
It's a Global Day of Action, by the way.
Global Day of Action. And in case of emergency, just dance. Yeah. Woo. This guy knows where it's at. All right. Thanks, everyone. Peace out.